The mic's on now. Thank you for coming. Good afternoon. We're going to go ahead and we're just going to lay down what's going to be going on today. Chief's going to come out and he's going to talk to you guys. And then after he goes ahead and speaks, he's going to give you guys the opportunity to go ahead and ask questions, to be respectful out of everybody's time and to make sure that everybody's questions are going to be asked. We will have some microphones that we're going to walk around with, and we'll give you the ability to speak. And also allows so that way there's no repetition with questions being asked, and that everything is thoroughly vetted and you guys get your answers you guys want, okay? Okay, here's Chief Soelberg.
Get around your mics and not try to turn anybody off. All right, I think we're good. Thank you for being here this afternoon. Thank you all for being here today. I know you've been anxious to hear from me regarding the teen violence investigations. Over the past several weeks, our focus at the police department has been on supporting tremendous investigative activities that have been occurring behind the scenes. These efforts are exactly what have led to recent arrests. But one of the biggest frustrations we have heard is that people want to hear directly from me. In the absence of hearing directly from me, inaccurate information has continued to proliferate. Gilbert is my home. I come to you not just as your police chief, but as a father myself. Gilbert is the place where I, like many of you, choose to raise my family because of the sense of community and safety that makes Gilbert so special. These recent incidents of teen violence have instilled fear and brought forth more questions on how something like this could happen in our town. I want to start with this message to our community. This is one of the safest large cities in the country, and our neighboring communities also boast a high level of community safety. That's what makes these recent acts of teen violence in the East Valley even more shocking. The death of Preston Lord in Queen Creek is senseless and tragic, and while the Maricopa County Attorney's Office continues their review of the investigation, I want to assure you that any act of violence is not and will not be tolerated. Violent crime is on the rise across the country. Although overall crime is down in Gilbert, violent crime is up, and that is reflected both in crime trends involving adults and our youth. In 2022 and 2023, Gilbert PD responded to 375,568 calls for service across our community. Of those calls for service, incidents of group teen violence, being teen-on-teen violence, ages 14 to 18, have made up less than 0.07% of our total calls for service. Having said that, every call for service matters. We will continue to investigate reports of crimes, pursue justice for victims, and hold offenders accountable, teen or otherwise. As a parent, now more than ever, we need to be connecting with our kids. We need to be talking with them. We need to ensure that they are making smart choices with their activities and with their friends. And if they fear for their safety, please report this immediately to authorities or to a trusted adult. If you haven't already, when you get home tonight, talk with your kids. I know I am. I want to be clear that there are questions that I'm not going to be able to answer today, as they are part of active investigations. These cases involve violent assaults on our teens. We do not take them lightly. Through our investigations, we've also learned that not all of these attacks are random. Before Preston's death, we had 13 arrests related to incidences of teen violence that occurred between February 2022 until his death. Since January 3rd, we've made 9 additional arrests, including one within the last 24 hours, thanks to the assistance of community members and the media. Over the past 2 years, we have made 22 arrests related to teen violence, and there will be more. In order for these arrests to have been made, our detectives have to thoroughly review all evidence associated with the crime, conduct interviews with all of the individuals involved, obtain multiple search warrants, complete digital forensics examinations, and when necessary, submit evidence to the crime lab. In today's world of social media, many of these tasks are made even more complex. Through our investigations, we know that many of these incidents were being recorded and shared privately and publicly on numerous social media platforms. Researching and verifying authenticity and accuracy of this information takes time, but we are committed to the process of doing this right, and we appreciate the public's and the media's continued assistance. Many have asked, who are the Gilbert Goons, and how long have we known about them? As we have shared many times, in the handful of cases that we've reported to our department, that have been reported to our department over the past year, none of our interviews with victims or reports ever used the term Gilbert Goons or provided information that the attacks were perpetrated by any members identifying themselves as a Gilbert Goon. While we weren't initially aware of the term, we were actively addressing the violent crime incidents involving teens during that time. It is now becoming clear that some individuals may be associating themselves with the term Gilbert Goons. And we now have an active investigation in collaboration with our law enforcement partners to determine if the Gilbert Goons can be classified under Arizona law as a criminal street gang. It is also important, and I cannot stress this enough, for people who have knowledge of past incidents of violence or even potential future acts to report this information to authorities. We are thankful to the victims and the families of the victims who have had the courage to step forward and report prior incidents of teen violence so that we can properly investigate those and support successful prosecution of any offenders. The issues of teen violence or any violence in our community is not just an issue for the police department to resolve. These issues are complex, and it will take all of our efforts working together, finding solutions to end violence in our community. Later this afternoon, the town will take our next steps towards working to address this problem. Our Gilbert Town Council subcommittee will be meeting at 3 p.m. in the council chambers. We are united with our community, and we are in this together. Thank you. We will now take questions. Officer Leba will be passing the mic around.
Hello, I'm Alexis with Arizona's Family. So people are saying that you and your department have dropped the ball on this investigation and that there needs to be accountability in this investigation and towards the police department, especially towards you, Chief. Some have even called for you to personally be fired. What's your message to the community about that?
As I stated in my statement, we have actively been working these cases. As I mentioned in the numbers that I talked about, we have made 22 arrests over the last year on these cases. It's not something that we ignored. It's not something that we put on the shelf. We have actively been working on these investigations. I understand there's some frustration that information may not be available as quick as you would like it, but we have pursued these investigations. We've been working on these investigations to make sure that we get proper justice for these victims.
Ashley wasn't here with ABC 15. You just said that you haven't ignored these investigations. However, you guys looked into a case on August 18th at the Gilbert In-N-Out. That case has now been reopened. Officers had names, leads, videos. What happened with that case? Why was it never looked into or followed up on?
Thank you for that question, Ashley. In order for arrest to be made and successfully charged, the authenticity and accuracy of any evidence must be verified, and probable cause must be established. When patrol conducted their initial investigation, the victim identified one of the subjects who initially attacked him, but was unable to identify any of the other assailants. This subject admitted to being at the fight, but denied attacking the victim. The video of the fight showed the subject approaching the fight, but it did not show that subject attacking the victim. Another witness was interviewed, but was unable to provide information related to the identities of the assailants, and officers weren't able to establish probable cause at that time. We had the video that we had received. We shared that video with our officers and our detectives and our SRO specifically to try to see if we could identify them. We were unable to identify them. So as I mentioned, if we can't establish probable cause, absent further information, we need to inactivate the case. But that doesn't mean it's a case that is closed. It is pending additional information. When we reviewed our cases, we saw that this was a case that we could share with the public to try to identify these people. Once we did share that in December, we had them identified, and from that information, as I mentioned, following through with the other evidence that was needed, we made arrests in that case. And it's still an open investigation because there are still others that we are looking for, so it's still an active investigation.
So why not do that before you have another similar case as well from December 17th of 2022, where now you're looking for more subjects? Why not put these pictures out to the public sooner if you're not ignoring these cases?
Yep. So in the December 22 case that you're referring to, we made an arrest that night. We had another individual that was identified as being involved in the assault. However, we had other independent witnesses that said he was not. And so at that time, the second individual was not charged at the time of that case. The initial charges were brought forward on that individual. And once again, that's, as I mentioned, we looked at all of our teen violence cases, and that was one we looked at. Even though we charged and it was cleared arrest, we looked at it and there's more we can do with that. And so that's why we shared the video, and we are actively pursuing charges on additional people related to that case.
Chief, thanks for doing this today. I'm Bianca Lona with Channel 12. I have a couple follow-up questions about both the August and the December of 2022 case.
Okay.
Going back to the August case, you mentioned the night of the assault, the victim identifying one of the now juvenile suspects to police. You guys talked to that suspect and he denied involvement, but showed you a video and pointed out another suspect as the initial assailant. The case was inactivated about a month and a half later due to a lack of leads and probable cause, as you mentioned. Couple questions about this. What follow-up was done with that now juvenile suspect? Did your officers just take this teenager at his word when he said he wasn't involved?
So absent other information that showed otherwise, which we now have and we didn't have at that time, we didn't do further information at that time. And keep in mind, because there was some confusion on that video where the victim and the other witness that we talked to, they pointed to the video and identified who started the fight, but they did not know the names of any of the other people, both the victim and the witnesses. They said that they did not know the other people. And so that's why it was inactivated. We knew based on their statements who started the fight, and that's who we have since identified who that person is. But at the time of that initial report and those follow-up interviews, they did not know who that person was. The one person who we did know, we couldn't establish probable cause to charge at that time.
And to follow up on that, the father of the victim in this case has been outspoken about how this impacted his family. A lack of action and arrests led to continued threats to his son to the point that they had to move their child overseas. He said to us in an interview that handing over the photos and video that his son and victim provided to you guys that night to SROs felt like you were pawning the case off to somebody else to handle it. How do you respond to that?
Our SROs are dealing with our kids. We're at every high school and every junior high each and every day. That is our best source of information. They know the kids more than our patrol officers will know them, or our detectives. That's why we went to the source that would have the best information. Unfortunately, they weren't able to identify the individuals involved that we saw in the video. So that's why it wasn't pawned off. Just like any investigation, you're going to bring in any resources you can to try to identify. And in that case, we went to the SROs hoping that they would recognize somebody, and unfortunately they were not.
Had there not been public pressure around these cases, would your department reopen them and share the photos with the public?
We started looking at these cases. We were aware, let me backtrack a little bit. We were aware, I don't know who's beeping. We were aware of incidents of group teen violence, as I stated. We had seen that from December of 22 throughout that next year. But it's important to note that those incidents were sporadic, different locations, and even though the similar behavior, and that's why when I talk about the cases and the arrests that I just talked about, those are cases that are similar behavior, group teen violence of groups attacking other groups. Sometimes random, sometimes not. And in those cases, all these cases I've talked about, we are working on identifying who, if any, they are associated with. But in regards to this case, we looked at both the December case and all these other cases as we were looking at this pattern, and then after continuously after Preston was killed in Queen Creek, we looked at our cases. Let's look to see if we have, and obviously we're communicating with Queen Creek and other jurisdictions as well throughout all our investigations. But we are looking for any leads that would help them. We were looking for leads that would help us with any of our inactivated cases. And that's when we looked at all of our teen violence for about a 2-year time period to try to identify, is there any acts that we weren't aware of associated with these groups or any other behavior? And so we started looking into those cases. So not only the December case that you talked about, the August case with at the In-N-Out, those were 2 of numerous cases that we looked at. Some cases there was nothing more to do, but in those 2 cases there was more for us to do, and so we reopened them.
Hi Chief, I'm Jessica Bain with Axios.
Hey.
So while you said that these attacks in Gilbert were sporadic, it's become clear that there were attacks in other surrounding jurisdictions that were similar.
Mm-hmm.
Prior to Preston's death, were your officers actively talking with Queen Creek, Mesa, Pinal County about teen violence incidents?
Yeah, teen violence is no different than any of our other crimes, whether it's a crime trend or something significant. We communicate with all of our surrounding agencies. We all participate in the East Valley Fusion Center, where we're sharing information. We are making sure if there's a crime trend that we're sharing it, if we're looking for individuals that we help share that. And then we also have the state at the ACTIC level that we share information as well. So teen violence was no different than any of the other crime trends that we look at, and we make sure that we're accessing any resources we can and sharing. We also have monthly meetings with the chiefs. We have monthly meetings with our investigators and with our commanders and assistant chiefs. And they talk about any trends they're seeing, you know, whether it's a residential burglary series that we're seeing and seeing if anyone else has similar behavior. Sometimes they don't, and sometimes we do. And then we work on together to share information and see if there's anything else we can do to bring justice to these victims.
And did teen violence come up in those?
Yes, just like any other case.
Hi Chief, Lindsay Regas at Fox 10. I have 2 questions for you. How many of the open cases right now are dealing with associated with the Gilbert Goons?
So not only the active investigations, but the closed investigations, that determination will come part of our Gilbert Goons investigation. So that is separate, basically intel gathering, trying to identify whether we can classify them as a gang. That will come once we conclude that investigation. So all these cases we're talking about and any others, we're looking at any history of all these individuals and what involvements they have to see if there's others that we need to talk to. That's why it's going to take a little while for us to complete that investigation. We want to be thorough, making sure we're making any connections, not missing anything, and working with all the agencies to make sure that we're addressing that. Because that's, as I mentioned in the beginning, that is one of the prevailing questions. Who is and who is not a Gilbert Goon, and what crimes are they responsible for? That is our intent, to use that investigation to answer those questions and provide that to you once we do. And we'll come back to you guys when we do get those answers.
And previously you brought up that the Gilbert Goons weren't mentioned in previous reports, but just talking with parents the last month, they'll tell you they've heard about the Gilbert Goons for the past 5 years. You mentioned that you have children yourself, so what are you going to do as a chief and as a parent to be in the know about the Gilbert Goons and maybe another group that may pop up?
Yeah. So let me start by asking our community that if they, as I mentioned before, anytime you have information about a crime, whether it's something that occurred in the past or something that's going to be coming up in the future, to please contact us. In those situations, we need that information to be proactive, but also to be reactive to the cases that have already happened, to make sure that we have the proper information. Social media is a very dynamic, as I mentioned, situation where we don't have access to everyone's channels. We don't have access to what people are saying or doing. But when people discover information, that's what we're asking. Please come to us or wherever you live, go to that jurisdiction and share that information so we can properly vet it and see what we can do with it.
Hi, Chief Robert England with the Arizona Republic.
Hey.
I have a series of questions, and I apologize for that. The first one regards to Richard Kenner and the Kenner case, the in and out case from August. He has told us that if the Gilbert police had acted sooner, he is just consumed with the concern that he believes Preston Ward might have been saved. How do you respond to that?
So as I mentioned with his investigation, we did everything we could with that investigation. As far as following up with the leads, the one thing I mentioned that we could have gotten that video out sooner to the public to try to identify. But in that case, we interviewed the victim, we interviewed the witness, another witness. We weren't able to establish probable cause at that time. We tried identifying him, as I mentioned, internally, and we weren't able to identify him at that time. I understand his anger and his frustration and the delay, and I wish that could have happened sooner, but I can tell you that we did everything we could, and we will continue not only this case, but every other case to continue to pursue justice and follow up on leads. If we come to a dead end and it's an active case that we just have nothing else to follow up on, it's going to be inactivated. But as I said, as soon as we get additional information, we can reopen that investigation. Oftentimes that comes from other cases that information is provided to us, which now we have an identity or we identify someone from something other, and we can connect it back to that case.
Do you think the department failed to connect the dots in the Gilbert Goons case in the run-up to the death of Preston?
So as I mentioned, we were aware of the teen violence going on, but in saying that, as I mentioned, it was sporadic. It wasn't the same group of individuals in each incident. On a couple occasions, it was the same individual, and you have some of the names of the adults where we arrested them multiple times, but each time was in a different location, and usually with a different group every time. So that is what we're trying to do, is identify with our Gilbert Goons investigation which cases are tied into that. And as you allude to, is there anything we missed? That is part of that investigation, and that's why we went back through all of our cases to make sure we didn't miss anything. And as I mentioned, we reactivated 2 cases from that.
There have been a lot of what I would describe as miscommunication from the department. One of those is really concerning to me, and it happened last week when you announced your first arrest of Mr. Fantastic. A great name, by the way. But when you arrested him, we presented you with a question about the other arrests made on that same day, and your officers denied for hours that there have been additional arrests until we presented you with the documentation showing that, yeah, in fact, you had arrested people, and you turned around in a matter of minutes and acknowledged those arrests. Why is there that disconnect?
So let me explain how the miscommunication originated, and I'll give you the facts of what that timeline was. We notified the victim of the father. We notified the victim of 1 arrest on the evening of January 9th. We provided the victim with the victim's rights form, and on this form, the detective listed all of the individuals involved. The detective mistakenly listed all of them under the column, which shows that they were all arrested and or referred. There is a different column where we know the individuals' names, but we have not made an arrest yet. So at that time, that night, we had made 1 arrest, the name you had mentioned, Mr. Fantastic, which explains the confusion when you guys were having your press conference with the Maricopa County Attorney's Office asking about the other 3 arrests. Those other 3 arrests had not been made at that time. The second arrest, the first juvenile was arrested at 12:42 p.m. After, as I mentioned, and that's the information that we had provided, after the press conference where you already had the information that they'd been arrested. They had not been arrested. We were out looking for them. The second juvenile was arrested at 2:07 that same afternoon. The fourth individual, Arredondo, the adult, he was arrested at 2:35 p.m. So that's the actual arrest times. We understand there was some confusion based on that mistake of putting them in the column of having been arrested. However, they were not arrested, so we weren't miscommunicating or holding off on answers. We relayed the information once they were made, an arrest was made. We did not want to broadcast that we were out looking for them. We don't want them to hide. We want to make sure that we can safely take someone into custody.
And just to follow up on that, I think one of the things that I've noticed is the lack of communication. I mean, just say, no, only one person has been arrested, that's fine, it's accurate, I guess. But just to explain that to us and others who are reporting this might have solved a problem and a public relations mess for you.
No, I understand, but we didn't know, we were trying to figure out how you knew that.
Well, I gave you the documents.
I know, that's what I'm saying. When we were getting calls about, tell us about the other 3 arrests, we were still looking for them to make an arrest. I couldn't tell you anything about them because we were still looking for them. So I understand, as I talked about the source of that, of how that miscommunication through an error of us that was relayed to the media, that you are assuming we're either covering something up or hiding, but that is absolutely not the truth. We were actively looking for those individuals. So we acknowledged one arrest and we were actively looking for the others. And as soon as we made that 3rd arrest, we updated everyone to those the 3 additional arrests.
Just a follow-up question. So you did mention that you guys have been in communication with other departments here in the East Valley. You also mentioned that teen violence made up 0.7% of the calls that you had last year.
Oh, that was a 2-year time period.
2-year time period. So is Gilbert seeing a higher rate of teen violence than other East Valley communities? And is that something that you guys discuss?
So we discussed the incidents of teen violence, but I can't tell you what their stats are. I know roughly our surrounding agencies and their stats and what their trends are, because that's what we talk about when we meet each time. But I can tell you what percentage of theirs went up or down. I can tell you that percentage that I gave you was based on teen ages 14 through 18, where the offender and the victim were teens. Doesn't mean there wasn't another teen and it was a 22-year-old. We wanted to focus specifically on that group. We can run the numbers 100 different ways, but we ran those numbers, and based on our total calls for service and those teen-on-teen incidents, that's the percentage that we have.
And then obviously the Gilbert Goons name mentions Gilbert. You also mentioned that there are groups of people who have been arrested who were involved in other group attacks and things like that. So are you guys, or do you have a message for the people who haven't been arrested in any of these cases?
Yeah, my message would be, if we can prove charges on you, we will arrest you, whether it's us, any of the county, Queen Creek, Mesa, Chandler. You cannot commit a crime and expect to get away with it. Sometimes what's unfortunate, and we've seen in several of these cases, for whatever reason, and I understand there are different reasons, people have not reported these incidents. Of our new cases, that is the case. 4 of those were never reported to us until we had the videos, and then we were able to share those, and we've been able to make contact on those cases now. But prior to that, we didn't have a call for service. We did not have a report. So that's why it's important, and we keep harping on the issue of, please, if you have any information, whether you're a victim, even if you don't want to prosecute, please let us know what that information is so that we can thoroughly investigate. Because it may be, while they don't want to prosecute or we can't establish a crime, there may be some information, as I mentioned, of connecting these cases. If we can get some information from one case, it may help us or Mesa or Queen Creek or somebody else with their investigation.
22 arrests,
Mhm.
how many were made public? And if you were aware of this teen violence, why weren't the public alerted?
So those 22 arrests were over a time span, as I mentioned, from roughly December of 22 to last night. So while the number 22 sounds like a lot, but over a roughly 15 month time period, that's less than one a month. So in those situations where some of the arrests that are within these categories, we did do notices to the public. As I mentioned, when we looked at these teen violences, there was never an association with a group or the Gilbert Goons. And so there was no cause or reason to connect those to that activity because we weren't aware of that group at that time with all these other arrests. And so as those arrests, and each arrest is different. And some of these arrests, it's involving people they know, and it's one of those, we make and it happens every day, we make arrests, and we don't notify the media or the public on any arrest, on every arrest. We notify them of ones you ask us about, and then ones that are of concern to the community. We understand that teen violence is a concern to the community, and we address that through our proactive patrols and making sure we were arresting those that we could show were responsible.
Chief White, News 12 News, thank you so much for holding this today. Every single time we go out and cover one of these events, one thing that we always hear from those in the community, victims, parents, concerned citizens, is that they say that they've turned in videos of these assaults. They say that they've turned in names of the suspects to the police department numerous times, and they just feel like their voices aren't being heard when they're trying to give these tips to the police department. What's your response to that?
So, I appreciate the question, and it raises a really important point about I mentioned before, our online tip. If that's how the information is brought in, that is not monitored 24/7. And so if that's the avenue that information is being provided to us, that is not the timely way of getting that information, especially if something's about to happen or pending. But we did look at our tip line, and we found one incident that was reported, and in that incident, it didn't mention anything about the Gilbert Goons or a group that was planning an attack of any way. If there's other information, we received a lot of information after the death of Preston. Both us, Queen Creek, the other surrounding agencies have received a lot of information. We received a lot of information from you. We've asked the community to send it to us. I get that maybe they don't want to send it to us and they'll send it to the media, and I appreciate those of you who have sent information because that's helped us make some of our cases. So that information was shared to us. The majority, I can tell you all of the information that we received regarding the Gilbert Goons occurred after Preston was killed.
And then you brought this up at the beginning, kind of talking about with so many members of the community reaching out, like I said, sending in the videos, sending in the names and everything. Is there any misinformation that you want to address at this time? Has there been any instances of videos being sent in that didn't even happen in Arizona? Any situations like that that your department has come across?
So a couple, yes. We had one that was called in, provided to us, and it was at a high school. So they thought it was involving the in and out. We reviewed it. We were actually able to connect it to one of our cases. So we appreciate that coming in. Whether they think it's part of this group or not, share that information so we can try to determine if it's our case. Because there's some that we received that weren't our case. It was Mesa or it was another jurisdiction. And so we need that information, and we will share that information with, if we can't determine if it's ours or not, that's when we'll share it with the other agents to determine, does this look familiar to each other? Do you recognize this place? And making sure that we have that opportunity to get that information, share it with our investigators, and take appropriate action.
Hi, Paolo Schools, KTR News. So from those 22 arrests over those last 2 years, is that all included in what the department is going to be looking at going back?
So, no, because we're looking at more. So as I mentioned, we've read hundreds of cases to see if there's any links. As far as what that linkage is, if any, that's going to be part of the Gilbert Goons investigation to identify. We know key players that have been mentioned and a lot of other people that are associated with them, and that's what they're looking at, is what connection, if any, do they have, and who's claiming it or who's not, and what affiliation do they have with anyone.
Can you give any indication to the size or scope of this group?
That'll be part of our Gilbert Goons investigation when we release that.
Gotcha. And one last question. I'm just curious, why wait until now to address this? You know, as someone like many of us who have had to dig through this, I think we're good at this, but this has been kind of hard to unwind. And I imagine it's much, much harder for members of the community, especially because what we're hearing now is a lot of things that we've heard before. So why wait till now?
Yeah, as I mentioned before, we've been sharing information. We haven't done a press conference, obviously. This is the first one I've done. But we've been sharing that information. Our focus was on the investigations, making sure that we got justice for those victims. We've been sharing information. We've been answering all of the questions that you have provided. Some of the connections you want us to make, I can't make those connections yet. We're still doing those investigations. But we have been responsive to the community, to their questions. I understand, as I mentioned in the beginning, people want to hear from me, and that's why I'm here today, okay? And you will hear more from me. As we have case updates and as we have additional information, we will be sharing that not only with the media, but with the community as well.
I'm gonna have just a few quick follow-up questions for you. So just to be clear, we're trying to understand this. People have come to us and said that they have sent you names, they've identified the people in pictures that your department has posted. Why have there not been more arrests?
So, kind of going off that other question, we need to make sure if there's any misinformation, because some of the information we receive isn't accurate. Some people will say it's one person, but then we got somebody else saying it's somebody totally different. So that's part of the investigative process, is to vet out, can we prove that this picture is this individual? Some of the kids have the same hairstyles, the same clothing that they're wearing, and so we need to make sure. And even once we identify, and they are correct, they have identified a lot of these individuals. We made arrests on the ones that we've been able to establish probable cause, and there are more arrests coming for those additional. But not only are we evaluating, is this the person, can we prove it's the person, but as I mentioned about the evidence, gathering evidence to prove they were there, and is there any other evidence that we can obtain, whether it's through admissions or search warrants, to help prove our case, because we want to make sure it's a thorough investigation, and we don't want to jump ahead of the game and make an arrest because we know it's him, but all we have is someone said that's him, and I can see on the video. And obviously, videos tell a great story. It provides excellent evidence for us, but also there's more that comes to it of trying to determine how and why, and is anyone else involved? Because in some cases, I mentioned with the case in August from In-N-Out, the video shows him approaching, but doesn't show him actively involved. But yet we made an arrest on that because of the information we were able to obtain in our investigation to show that he was involved in the assault.
You described this. You described the teen violence here as sporadic. We have heard of numerous attacks happening at common areas, the Gilbert In-N-Out, parking garage. Why not step up patrol in those areas if you're seeing multiple situations there? And then I just have one more quick one, I promise.
So we have, and we did, and we will continue to do so. We've done an analysis of all of our calls for 4 years at In-N-Out. We have that pretty close to being ready to share with the media. I know some of you specifically had asked for it, I believe a couple of you in here, and that is close to being ready. We have helped you out with that because when you just look at a calls for service, it's kind of the initial report that you would have gotten from records doesn't have a lot of information. So we've gone through every one of those cases, and some of those it's a 911 hang up call or someone was overheated from the heat. So we're going to give you all the information so that you can sort through it. But in those cases, there were 8 calls in 4 years of a fight at In-N-Out. Of those 8 cases, only 3 times was a report made. And let me clarify. In those 3 times, we were able to get there, identify suspects, and all the other times, they were gone when we arrived.
My follow-up question is, you mentioned it, you've heard of misinformation spreading because we haven't heard from you. We hear of a broken trust from the community, concern with who has been arrested and who hasn't. People come to us and ask, is there a cover-up? What is your response to that?
I got 2 responses for you, 1 second. So, reference your first question about, is there a cover-up? Absolutely not. There's no cover-up. We have an excellent department. We have excellent officers do excellent work every day. Our officers out on the street, our patrol officers, those behind the scenes, they're actively working these cases. I've mentioned, you know, the 13 arrests before Preston was killed. We have actively been working not only these cases, but all of our other cases. It is a safe community. We've had a rash of violence, which we've addressed, and we will continue to address. It's not done. We need to continue to work on not only this, but any other crime trend that we're seeing within our community. And I hope that our community, as they've had for years of this being the safest community in Arizona and in the country, that will continue. We, as I mentioned in the beginning, our violent crime is up slightly. Our overall crime is down, but we want to focus on all crime, and specifically the violent crime, making sure that there aren't additional victims. Was there a second part that I missed?
How do you restore trust in the community?
So just reiterating what I just said, as far as we have actively, we weren't asleep at the wheel. There is no cover up. We have an excellent department with excellent employees. We've been pursuing charges on these investigations, and we will continue to do so. We'll continue to work with our partners, collaboration, and internally looking for ways to improve our services, looking at technology that can help us additional crimes, anything available to us to make sure that our community feels safe.
So, I think you mentioned technology, makes me want to ask, are you using facial recognition in these photographs to identify suspects?
So yes, we've used facial recognition. Facial recognition isn't an absolute science, even if it gives us a probability. And in these situations, from what I'm aware of, we didn't get any significant indication on any of these, and that we've had to rely on the community.
So, good old-fashioned police work.
Yeah.
But so where I'm going with that though is that, and I am comparing your department to, but only in this instance, Mesa Police was provided a report in January, a couple weeks ago. Within a week, they had made an arrest in that case. When I heard about that suspect, we published other videos involving that same suspect and a photograph of him holding a gun. And so I'm interested in how long it's going to take you, and that suspect, of course, was involved in one of the prior incidents where there's an attack video that clearly shows him. So what is it that's the inhibitor? Why can Mesa Police make that arrest within a week? And when you're faced with 2 or 3 other videos and some photographic evidence, why is it taking so long?
So I kind of addressed that before, but I'll address it again. That each investigation is different. And it's not just a matter of saying it's that individual. We want to get the evidence. And I'm not saying they didn't do this. They do thorough investigations. But with our investigations, not only do we want to identify the person, but then what other evidence can we get? And also, how are there any other cases that we're trying to connect them to so that we can make that follow-up and do those investigations at one time and make sure that we get them in custody. Doesn't mean we're ready to make an arrest. As soon as we're ready to make an arrest, we're making an arrest, and we will continue to do so. But it's got to be a thorough investigation, and every case is unique. In some of the cases we talked about where we shared those videos, we had a good idea of who some of the suspects were, and we got confirmation on some of the others. But in some of those, we were still trying to locate and identify the victim. I need a victim, and we've identified them all now, but it took us a little bit to get all those victims identified.
In a forum, you mentioned, I just want some clarity on this, but you were quoted at a forum talking to some state legislators and suggested that one of the things you were doing was waiting for Queen Creek to finish its investigation. That's how it came out. And I wonder, is there a sense that there are arrests you can't make because you're waiting to see where the Queen Creek investigation, the homicide investigation, plays out? Or are all these considered independent?
So 2 things. I can't comment on Queen Creek's investigation, specifically, obviously, to Preston Lord. But in regards to, as I mentioned, all of our cases, we are looking for any connections. We do not, when we have probable cause to arrest somebody, we don't wait because somebody else is waiting for them, or wait to see if anyone else answers the phone to see if they're looking for them. We make that arrest when we have our case ready, and sometimes it's an in-custody arrest like you've seen, and sometimes it's a referral, or it's a long-form complaint to the county attorney. All right, we are going to do 2 more questions. You 2 are the lucky 2 that have your hands up. Levi?
Thank you. And these are just a
At this point, no internal affairs investigations, but that's part of our review process, not only what we're doing on the criminal investigation side of looking at these cases, but also looking at the goon investigation. Is there anything that we missed? Is there anything that was done wrong by the officers? We have not seen that. There's, as I mentioned, each case is unique, and we will look at that, and that'll be part of our review process internally, as well as, you know, we want to be efficient. We want to make sure we're handling these cases. So if there's something that we find that we can improve on, even if it's not a policy violation, but we will look for improvements that we can do.
And regarding the cases that were reopened, were they reassigned to new detectives when they were reopened?
They were, it's not just one detective they're doing on these investigations, so there's various detectives that are working on these investigations.
Last question. A lot of folks have raised concerns about the availability of brass knuckles in light of many of these attacks where brass knuckles are involved. One victim in particular has actually written to the state legislature advocating for a bill that would ban the sale of brass knuckles. What's your opinion on that?
So that's where that information needs to go, is to the state, because that is a state issue for the legislators to decide whether they want to have restrictions or ban. That is up to them, and more than willing to work with the legislators on that bill or whatever they come up with to help us reduce crime.
Would you guys support that?
I never take a stance on a bill until I see it, because I can say yes and they throw something crazy in there that has nothing to do with what we're talking about. So we always want to see whatever legislative proposals. I am part of the ACOP legislative committee. We work with our legislators and our lobbyists to make sure that issues like that are properly vetted by law enforcement, and we'll continue to do so. All right, last question. Yeah, I think it was.
In the two initial appearances for the August 18th case, Arredondo and Fantastic, state prosecutors tried to set a high bond of $100,000, then go on to say they were part of the Gilbert Goons. Then the judge stepped up and said, well, what is your proof? I can't set a high bond just because you're saying this. And they said, well, that's what's in the police paperwork. And so the judge is saying, you just listed that. Both of them are just part of it, but don't have any supporting evidence. Why is that?
So, as I've stated, that connection we are working to make, if any. It may be that we look at that and there is no connection. But based on the information, there appeared to be a connection, but we haven't been able to provide that to the courts. And that's going to be part of our investigation. If we get information that will help in that case as it proceeds, we will provide that to the county attorney. But in those situations where we are still investigating, that will come after. All right, thank you all. For those of you who are going to see me across the street, we've got the town hall at 3 o'clock. So thank you for being here, and thank you for your assistance on this. Appreciate it. Bye.
Thank you guys for coming. We'll allow you guys to go ahead and break down all your equipment, and then once that gets broken down, then we'll escort you back into the lobby and out of the secure facility. Thank you.